And for a Western perspective on this big development, we are now joined by Lt Col Daniel L. Davis, a military expert. Thank you so much for joining us here on WION. The question now really is, what happens next? Putin has formally announced the annexation of these 4 regions. The West says there is no way they're going to recognize this annexation. They're talking about imposing further costs on Russia. Kiev says we're not going to negotiate with Putin anymore. And they're seeking fast-track NATO membership, which may not actually happen anytime soon. The question really is, what are the real implications of this annexation? And could this be a tipping point in the Ukraine war?
Well, I think that there's no question that this is a major change in the course of the war. And I think that the primary purpose of this annexation, coupled with the military mobilization that you referred to a moment ago, is that Putin is communicating to everybody in the world, to his own people and to everybody on the other side of the fight, that he is all in and that he has committed his life and his regime and the actual state of Russia to this. And I think that he wants everyone to understand that there is no going back. And you can see that that message is definitely received in Kiev and Washington. Everybody understands what's at stake right now. And I fear that this is going to escalate the war. And the risk of expanding beyond the borders of Ukraine is higher now than it was before, which is something that the West is going to really have to grapple with carefully.
All right. Lieutenant Colonel, we'll come in a moment to the role of the West in this changed scenario. But what do you think the implications of this annexation are likely to be for the people living in these regions? We saw how the Crimean Peninsula was annexed in a similar fashion by Putin-led Russia in 2014. Again, the West said they were not going to recognize it. It hasn't been recognized yet. But what does it really mean for the people living in these regions?
Yeah, in 2014, it was obviously significantly different in that there was no combat going on in Crimea. So it was a completely bloodless operation. And basically the life has not changed much for the people in Crimea, but they now regard themselves as Russian. In this situation, all 4 areas are still active combat zones, and these people are caught in the middle. And look, a lot of them are Russian speakers and desire to go to Russia. But mixed in with that are lots of Ukrainians who do not want to be, but they're all caught in the middle. Some of them are still on the other side, on the western side of those borders, that also want to go in. But both sides are now going to be caught in the crossfire as both the Russian army redoubles its efforts. The Ukrainian army is pressing harder than it ever has, and the destruction is likely to expand. So for the people caught in the middle right now, the most immediate response or result is going to be that they're probably going to be killed a lot more, and their cities and towns are going to be destroyed. There's no good outcome for anyone living in those areas.
Well, that does sound terrifying. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, another question that arises really is, why is the Russian president hell-bent on raising the stakes in this war? Now, many believed that, even his call for those so-called referendums came at a time when the Russian troops had suffered some shock reverses on the battlefield, with Ukraine actually managing to recapture some of its territory in the early part of September. Many saw his move even to call for partial military mobilization as a desperate measure. Why do you think Putin is upping the ante, and why now?
Well, when he made the move on February 24th, he basically threw the gauntlet down and put his entire regime on the line. And for whatever reasons, he thought he could actually win that basically on the cheap, with only 200,000 troops against a country of enormous size of 43 million people. That was always a foolish strategic decision. And of course, now that he was unable to win the quick victory that he desired, and probably just looking at it from Russia's point of view, they should have mobilized many months ago. But again, for whatever reason, he decided to continue to try to win it on the cheap there. Now then, with this move in Kharkiv that you referred to, where the Ukrainian force did achieve a significant military operation, it's now exposed that Russia can't win it on the cheap. So now then, Putin is faced with either withdrawing and giving up, or accelerating and continuing to try to now increase the combat power to win his battle. I don't think there's any chance that he could do the former and withdraw. So the only thing left to him for his survival is to accelerate. And that's exactly what he's done.
Well, Putin's very survival seems to depend on this. A final question, sir, before we let you go. While the West keeps talking about sending in more and more financial and military assistance to Ukraine to fight the Russian forces, they, keep talking about increasing the cost for Moscow. Even today, they're talking about imposing more crippling sanctions following the announcement of this annexation. But at the end of the day, wouldn't it be correct to say that the West has, for all practical purposes, actually failed miserably to deter Putin?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no question that we failed to deter Putin. As I've talked about many times in the months leading up to the war, if we had a chance to deter him, we had to use diplomacy and not only military coercion. Russia just doesn't respond to threats. They never have. We don't respond to just military threats, but that's the only thing that we tried. And now subsequently, we've tried all these financial penalties and everything else. But look, Russia is not going to respond to those. They know how to suffer. Russians, as a people, have suffered a lot through the centuries, and they know how to do that. But the big question is, and I think the thing that we need to watch more than just what happens on the battlefield, is what's going to happen in Western Europe as the winter sets in and the cold comes in and this energy crisis becomes potentially really problematic for the Western governments. And the West is going to maintain its support throughout this winter. That's what could determine what happens on the battlefield.
Absolutely. And therefore, is this war also imposing a heavy cost on the West? Thanks very much, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, for joining us here on WION and sharing your perspective with us on those big developments of the day.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.